Biological men have no place in women's sport. End this madness. Have the courage to speak up for women.
Okay, children, school is in session today. You might remember capitalism and cottagecore. This is going to be along the same lines. And I wasn't necessarily planning on doing this video, but I have seen, unfortunately, that even in the most progressive sides of the witchcraft community, the activist community in general, we're starting to catch a pitfall. We started off discussing and defending Imane Khelif and showing how much transphobia can also affect negatively cis women, and now we have sort of lost the thread.
You're wrong about Imane Khelif. Imane Khelif is an Algerian cisgender boxer. She has never identified as transgender, male or intersex. After winning a match against an Italian boxer in just 46 seconds, anti-trans celebrities like Elon Musk, Donald Trump, and feminist JK Rowling began publicly accusing Imane of being a man. This has literally no basis in reality and is entirely dependent on misinformation and stereotypes about how women should look and behave.
I was specifically impressed by this post by Matt, who not only is a queer person, but they are an amazing ally for all the kind of queernesses that they're not necessarily experiencing themselves. And this entire post showed complete solidarity with women, with people of color, with all these marginalizations except trans people. And we started off highlighting how transphobia here is the issue, even if it affects cis women. So let me present to you the case for this discussion. We start off with the story that you might have heard in the last week or 10 days. This is about Imane Khelif, who is an Algerian boxer, a woman that is currently competing in the Olympics in Paris. And she fought against an Italian who I didn't care learning the name, and I won't. Being Italian, I know what the fuck I'm talking about here. And they were beaten. The Italian was beaten. Were they knocked off? No. Imane gave her 2 punches and the Italian athlete forfeited. It was like, fuck this, I'm out of here. And yet this picture started to go around of this crying, dainty white woman that just lost their match. Interestingly, in this picture, Imane is actually going with her hand clearly to console the opponent. And yet, this picture took a life of its own. Thanks to whom? Well, the person that I told you before shouldn't make you want to share your Harry Potter house anymore. If you do, this is the person that you are supporting. Could any picture sum up our new men's rights movement better? The smirk of a male whose nose is protected by a misogynist sporting establishment enjoying the distress of a woman he's just punched in the head and whose life's ambition is just shattered. So what did Joanne do that day that she had nothing to do, which I guess it's most days? She went on and looked up Imane, and turns out that through the International Boxing Association,
the IBA was stripped of its status as the global governing body for boxing by the IOC in June last year because it failed to complete reforms on governance, finance, and ethical issues.
In 2023, she underwent a gender test, the details of which have never been released. And yet, the IBA decided to say that, according to this test, she must have higher testosterone and she must have an XY chromosome. Despite the fact that you would think if they have tested her and they have tested these details, they would have released those information, don't they? They haven't. We still don't know to this day what the test was. But disgustingly, other associations have confirmed, have felt compelled to confirm that actually Imane has female reproductive organs, which we're still talking about athletes, right? Like, do we need to know to throw punches if you had a hysterectomy? Like, wow, that's intense. Slightly invasive? I'm sorry, I am just picturing the fact that this girl had to undergo, at best, an ultrasound, at worst, like something medieval. Oh my God!
And this is something that they were proposing that they were going to do in, I think, the American state of Kentucky to middle school soccer leagues. That like teenage girls were going to have to undergo physical examinations before they were allowed to compete in sports.
Joanne is a feminist, guys. She is. Back to the actual events. Remember, the Italian athlete decided to forfeit against Imane. Got 2 punches, was like, I'm not doing these. Choices. 2-3 days later, Imane was supposed to fight an Hungarian athlete who decided to run with this accidental luck that she thought she had by playing the white dainty woman that is gonna be beaten up by a minotaur. I'm not joking, she posted this. She ran with the idea that, oh, poor little old me has to fight this horrible, huge, man-like athlete. How could I ever be asked to do this? Then there was a picture of the match, when, by the way, the Hungarian lost. And this is what it looks like. They have the same body frame and build of Imane, but all being white and playing the white, dainty woman that can claim to be oppressed and beaten up by anything that is not white, therefore is not femme. We'll get into that. By the way, this is not a first. There are a lot of athletes of color that have previously been accused of having high levels of testosterone or actually being men because of it, because they beat their white counterparts. Serena Williams was one of the principal examples of this. Another athlete was demanded to take spironolactone in order to bring down their testosterone levels to what is considered normal for a cis woman. By the way, 40% of athletes have PCOS, and that means that their testosterone levels are therefore higher because of that. I challenge anyone to think that that means automatically not woman. My personal indignation came along with one expressed by Alexis, the Black Forager. If you don't follow her, go, what are you doing? They don't necessarily talk about witchy stuff, but as the name suggests, they do a lot of foraging and herbalism, which really is witchy stuff if you ask me. And she posted something that exploded in my head because I had the same experience. Her being black, me being Arab, I'm not surprised, but I started to see indeed there is a pattern here.
Sometimes I wonder if my hyperfemme style partially comes from the burning in my cheeks I felt my first week of 7th grade when 2 classmates yelled tranny at me in the hallway for everyone to hear. I've been around 6 foot tall since middle school, and from a young age I realised that because of my height and my skin and my weight and where my bones decided to grasp one another, I was regularly seen as less feminine than my peers. She looks just like her father.
The equivalent of Alexis' experience for me happened when I was 11 years old. I was changing for PE. I was in middle school in Italy, and the girls, because, hey, gendered changing rooms, in the room started to laugh and make fun of me because, being Arab and fat, I was clearly hiding a penis in my panties.
Maybe I do.
But it's interesting.
Will it be so terrible?
Black and fat is never femme, apparently, to white supremacists.
And the main issue here is that we're essentially seeing these arguments of exclusivity being taken to their logical conclusion, as trans people have been trying to warn you all since they all started. For one thing, this Olympics is probably one of the strictest on transgender athletes that there has been. We had the first openly transgender athlete competing in weightlifting in the Tokyo Olympics of 2021, who was disqualified from the qualifying. A lot of this has come to a head after the controversy surrounding Lia Thomson in the American swimming competitions back in 2022. And this is where a lot of the issues really are just coming down to feelings and appearances. Like it seems really unfair to me that we are commenting on someone's appearance, someone's muscular builds, on going on their height, on whether or not they classify as a woman. From my experience, someone who's not particularly interested in sports, but who has, you know, these controversial debates essentially thrown at me just by existing. Really. You can't really exist within trans communities without seeing this stuff, without people sharing their hate, because It's a dark time, it's difficult for all of us, and a lot of us do try to then bond over our shared difficulties when these discussions are happening. So from my perspective, what's happened here is people were kind of nominally okay with trans people competing in the Olympics, while it seemed as though there was some kind of fairness mechanism at play. Previously, there's been limits on testosterone levels in people's blood, or how long somebody has transitioned for. But then everyone saw the photo of Lia Thomas standing in a row against all these other cisgender female athletes. And I think that's when a lot of people who originally were supportive of trans people, something niggled in their brain, something kind of latched on there. They looked at this photo and they thought, well, that can't be fair. Lia Thomas has a much larger build than the rest of the athletes that she's standing against. She's taller, she seems to be more muscular. When it comes to swimming, things like wingspan do seem to have some kind of impact. And so no matter how supportive people thought they were, they just saw this and they felt that something was wrong and that it was right to do something about it. It just hit somewhere in their core on this basis, very strong emotional feeling. And even when all the evidence was saying that Lia didn't have necessarily a biological advantage over the other swimmers.
In March 2022, Thomas became the first openly transgender athlete to win an NCAA Division I national championship in any sport after winning the women's 500-yard freestyle with a time of 4:33.24. Olympic silver medalist Emma Weyant was second with a time 1.75 seconds behind Thomas. Thomas did not break any records at the NCAA event, while Kate Douglas broke 18 NCAA records. Thomas was 9.18 seconds short of Katie Ledecky's NCAA record of 4:24.06. In the preliminaries for the 200 freestyle, Thomas finished second. In the final for the 200 freestyle, Thomas placed fifth, with a time of 1:43.50. In the preliminaries for the 100 freestyle, Thomas finished 10th. In the finals for the 100 freestyle, Thomas placed 8th out of 8 competitors, in 48.18 seconds, finishing last.
It just so happened in this race with the athletes that she was up against that she struggled. And one of the interesting things that came out of that controversy was people sharing the photo of the previous world record holder, Katie Ledecky, as if that was Lia Thomas. In fact, claiming that it was Lia Thomas, claiming that the cisgender athlete that had the world record was Lia Thomas, the trans female athlete. And I remember seeing, a few great responses to that. It's like, I don't know, maybe this is just what athletes are built like. Like, maybe if we start going by people's appearances.
They're even transvestigating Katie Ledecky, a world record-breaking swimmer with 8 Olympic gold medals. She competed with Lia Thomas just a few years ago, and GCs tried to portray her as a victim of competing with a trans woman. Now that Lia's out of the news, Katie's a man.
We're putting a lot of restrictions in that don't need to be in place. Since Lia Thomas, the International Olympics Committee has changed their guidelines on who is able to compete and essentially given a lot more free rein to individual international sporting federations. Many of those federations have applied much stricter rules to transgender athletes competing, including in boxing. Many of them have done outright bans. And so what we're seeing now, where say in the International Boxing Association, a cisgender woman was excluded, as far as we can tell, essentially just based upon the appearance of her build and a perceived advantage that she might have. This is, again, the logical conclusion of where all this was heading. So the issue, as always, becomes, how do we create a definition for a woman that excludes everyone we've decided isn't a woman and still includes everyone who we believe is a woman? Like, what are the metrics that ensures that we get a perfect exclusion of, say, all trans women, no trans women can be involved, but every cis woman can be involved? What are the rules of fairness here that we can apply that can do that successfully? And I think as far as a lot of people can tell, we can't do that. Another thing that's been really difficult for myself and everyone else in the trans community, because we all see the things that you're saying about this issue, is the number of people that are coming to Imane Khelif's defense by saying, no, it's okay, she's definitely not a trans woman. Like, no, she was born a woman, she was raised a woman, She has never identified as a male. And in fact, in her home country of Algeria, transition is illegal. So there is an issue here in trying to out someone as transgender in a country where transition is illegal. But most people aren't coming at it from that angle. They're coming at it from the angle of, no, it's fair that she's allowed to compete because she's not trans, which has the very strong implication then, if she was trans, it wouldn't be fair for her to compete. Let's take some of these ideas at face value then and take them to their logical conclusion. So if we're on the basis of, we've all decided it's completely okay to discriminate against trans women in sports. That's completely fine. Why is this happening then? We already have the Olympics Committee. I think one of their new rules is that trans women have to have completed their transition by age 12, which is effectively a ban on all trans women. Eligibility conditions for transgender female athletes. To be eligible to compete in the female classifications at a world rankings competition and to have recognized any world record performance in the female classification at a competition that is not a world rankings competition, a transgender female athlete must meet each of the following conditions to the satisfaction of the expert panel. They must provide a written and signed declaration in a form satisfactory to the medical manager that their gender identity is female. They must not have experienced any part of male puberty either beyond Tanner stage 2 or after age 12, whichever comes first. Since puberty, they must have continuously maintained the concentration of testosterone in their serum below 2.5 nanomoles per liter. They must continue to maintain the concentration of testosterone in their serum below 2.5 nanomoles per liter at all times, i.e. whether they are in competition or out of competition, for so long as they wish to retain eligibility to compete in the female classification at world rankings competitions and or have recognized any world record performance in the female classification at a competition that is not a world rankings competition. We have these restrictions in place, so why is this happening? Why is this happening? Like, we've put the restrictions in place, we've done what you've all asked, and there are no trans women here. So why are cis women being accused of being trans women?
Imane Khelif should sue every single account and outlet saying she's trans. That's also putting her life at risk. It's illegal in her country to be trans. The continuance of the blatant trans lie continues unfettered on Twitter.
The idea that those objecting to a male punching a female in the name of sport are objecting because they believe Khelif to be trans is a joke. We object because we saw a male punching a female.
And that's essentially the issue here. The more restrictions that you try to put in place to make sure that you exclude every single trans woman, you're just going to start encroaching it down and making the definition for what a woman can be smaller and smaller and more rigid and more defined. Well, actually maybe it is okay to exclude some cis women if they don't look like what we think women should look like.
Research has identified whiteness as a cultural sign of beauty and virtue, even in mostly non-white societies or nations. Consequently, being perceived as white or as whiter than most others perpetuates social hierarchies based on color and its enforcement through racism. Colorism, the preference for lighter skin tone within non-white cultures, remains evident around the world. Like the thinness standard and its rigid portrayal of feminine beauty that is outside existing norms for height and weight, a woman can never be too fair. Of course, some women are more advantaged than disadvantaged by a whiteness as beauty standard. Those who naturally have whiter complexions in places like India, the Middle East, Africa, and Asia are often considered more attractive, which can lead to greater confidence, better verbal skills, higher wages, and better marriage opportunities. International marketers have sold skin bleaching products and creams as lighteners to bring out a youthful glow in modern, affluent women. Such cosmetics are, in part, a legacy of colonialism and the eschewing of dark skin color as a sign of the working classes.
And then we get into the intersexism that is at play here, which is an incredibly complicated issue because the Western world has been so foundationally built upon the gender binary, the sex binary. You're either a man or a woman. We have legal categories which you can fit one into the other. And sex is a spectrum, just as much as gender is a spectrum. I find it very interesting in this, when the discussion was that Imane Khelif was intersex, when people did believe that she was born with an XY chromosome, made assumptions about a condition that she might have, one of which could have been something called Swyer's syndrome, and made the argument that, no, it's okay that she has Swyer syndrome and an XY chromosome because she's still a woman. Now, on the TERF side of things, they are so fixated on the chromosome side of things that they will go, no, if you have XY chromosomes, then you are a man. It doesn't matter how you're assigned at birth, how you're raised, what reproductive organs you have. It is all about the chromosomes. And I think a lot of people in this instance with that news can kind of see the flaw that comes out of that logic. One of the flaws in this logic is that chromosomes, as in being XX or XY, aren't all that important in the sex that someone develops innately. There are plenty of people who are assigned male at birth, but actually have XX chromosomes. That's because the determination on how your body develops isn't actually in the Y chromosome. It's a gene that is normally found on the Y chromosome, but sometimes likes to jump over to an X chromosome. That's called the SRY gene. So you can be born XX chromosomes, but have an SRY addition on there. That means that you would be assigned male at birth and raised male. Ironically, one of my friends who has this condition is a trans woman. So by all TERF definitions, and she loves to point this out, no, she is absolutely a biological woman. This is the issue in what we're trying to do, right? We're taking predefined metric of the gender binary as male and female. Then we have all this stuff that's kind of in between. And the more inside the box you are, if we decided on what a woman should look like and what a woman should be, it doesn't matter too much what the differences are. We'll still call you a woman. As you get slightly over, then we're getting into a weird gray area and the borders of this box start to break down. And this is the problem. We are trying to use a outdated system that is not fit for purpose, and we're just trying to shove things over here and shove things over there, and it kind of doesn't really work. And funny enough, when you are talking about a population that represents the top 0.001% of physical abilities and physical attributes, this is where the weird stuff starts to come in. Michael Phelps, the swimmer, has an unusually wide wingspan on his arms that gives him a biological advantage. He also has double jointed ankles and wrists, and his body produces half the lactic acid. By all levels of an unfair biological advantage, he absolutely has one, and we celebrate him for it. This only really becomes a problem in the women's sports teams.
Part of the reason why we have this belief that boys are inherently stronger than girls, and even the fact that we believe that gender is a binary, is because of sport itself, not the other way around. The strict sex segregation we've instilled in sports at all levels gives the impression that men and women have completely different capabilities, when in reality the relationship between sex and athletic capability is never so cut and dried. Researchers have noted for years that there may even be more diversity in athletic performance within a sex than between the sexes. One recent small study in Norway found no innate sex difference when it came to youth soccer players' technical skills. The researchers hypothesized that the gap they did find between girls and boys was likely due to socialization, not biology.
On the matter of unfair biological advantage, I think because of this new TERFic radical feminist narrative, we are kind of forgetting the reasons why there was gendered segregation to begin with in sports. I know that the current narrative is this idea of whatever you develop in puberty, bones, muscles, whatever, they give you an unfair advantage. Men are stronger. When you go through male puberty, you are supposed to be have all these muscles, all these more. Men like to think of themselves that way, don't they? The alpha male and stuff like that. Yeah, no, that's not why sports were segregated. They began to be segregated because when it was just athletes competing against athletes without gendered definitions or split, men were getting their ass kicked by women and they couldn't take it.
At the 1992 Barcelona Olympics, the Chinese shotgun shooter Zhong Shan won the gold medal in the mixed-sex skeet shooting event. Yet this was not a straightforward triumph for women in sports. At the following Olympics, women were barred from participating in the mixed event, yet there was no women's-only version either.
I think Katie, the trans fairy prince, follow him on Instagram if you don't, mentioned that one of their friends are currently writing a book on the issue because, again, we seem to forget this and we like to clutch our pearls saying trans athletes unfair. When, again, you take example like Michael Phelps, and that is actually the biological advantage, and we don't bat an eyelash there. And I wonder why. Might it be because we're bigots? On the point of sports and competitions and women in sports competition, there's something incredibly important to discuss that very rarely is discussed, and there is so little literature about it that I read it all. In every book that discusses female competition, which scholarly is defined as female intrasexual competition, and so why women are mean to each other, basically. One point keeps coming up in all the literature about it. And it's women have one place and one place only to unleash the rightful competitive rage at times. When a man rages and is competitive, we look up to him. They become CEOs and whatever. When women do it, oh, you're genuinely not a woman, a proper woman, a woman at all maybe. And the one context in which this is not as strictly mandated as in every other side of a woman's life is in sports. However, there is still a limit there. Now, very quickly, if you had no idea, all the athletes at the Olympics are classified as amateurs, which means they cannot make money out of their specialty. They cannot be paid, which is insane to me, but the way that athletes make money is through brand endorsement and deals. Now, you might have noticed that the idea that we have about what looks masc versus what looks femme has to do with body build. And muscular and strong, tall is men. And guess what? White and dainty and that kind of stuff is femme. That applies to athletes when they are offered brand deals as well. So women athletes are put to this insane double standard, as in everything, where they have to have a certain build to sustain their specialty, whatever that is. It's a physical specialty, it's sports. So they tend to be more muscular. They have developed that kind of body because they need to perform their sport. But at the same time, if you get too muscular, you will lose brand deals because a brand that wants your face associated with them, and you still need to be a nice girl, you need to look in a certain way. And if you are too muscular, you're not the white, dainty girl that we'd like to present as the face and image of our brand.
Why do big athletic companies like Nike, Adidas, and Reebok often choose high fashion models to pose as female athletes rather than draw from the ranks of the numerous professional athletes they sponsor? These images of female athletes suggest that it's more important that women look stereotypically feminine and lean than able to perform at an elite level. This doesn't happen nearly as often with men. Sports brands seldom use male models as the faces of their fitness lines, instead opting for professional male athletes.
You should be lean, you should be svelte, but you shouldn't be too muscular, because too muscular is the problem of looking manly. And the insane thing to me is that in a lot of circles that have to do with fitness, one of the most concerning things that I've seen through the years is that in fitness circles, women are terrified of putting on muscle. They want to keep lean, they want to maybe probably lose weight, but they don't want to look bulky, because bulky means man. And in the case of female athletes, it also means less money made from your brand deals, which are the only way that you can make money out of your discipline, because otherwise brands don't think of you as woman enough to show your face to promote their products. By the way, it's nothing new to hold women, cis or trans, to double standards that tend to conflict with each other. Beside the fact that Naomi Wolf has gone insane with the pandemic, what she wrote in The Beauty Myth still sort of stands. And the idea that we go after the private identity of women in the way that they look when we want to attack what they do outside in the world in their work. So in a way, even as competing as athletes, it's still something that we do. In the case of Imane, you can either be a strong boxer that wins against women and be called a man, or you can be a dainty, white, Italian girl that decides to forfeit because she wants to save her face despite the fact that she decided she would compete into boxing. Double standard. But Isha, what does all of this have to do with esoteric stuff, witchcraft, and Scarlet Imprint? But thanks to Elohim Leofar, the immigrant witch on Instagram, I love you, I discovered that this was not the first fascist stance that they decided to put their weight behind. And is this by chance? Isn't this just an isolated case? You know, there are bad people everywhere, so surely there's the odd bad person in the pagan community as well. It doesn't mean that their paganism or their interest in esoteric stuff is to blame. Or is it? There's a beautiful essay in Bringing Race to the Table, Exploring Racism in the Pagan Community by Amy Hale, that literally goes into detail and discusses the way that the new right, which is not the alt-right, pay attention here, awarely is not a word, I have invented it, I keep saying it, people understand what it means, but it's not a word in the dictionary, stop using it.
No, use it.
Make it a word. The new right and white supremacists awarely go and fish for new recruits in esoteric contexts. Why is that? Because they know that there are points of connections at the foundation. Do you remember when I made my first video here and I said, you know what, I noticed that there aren't many queer witches of color. I decided to try and take up space because I think that even with other pagans, there is a shared understanding. If you are mad about the state of the earth and how capitalism is destroying it, then surely you must understand how that kind of sympathy can be extended to other things that are being destroyed. Human rights, colonialism, the land, the traditions, that kind of thing. Well, the new right has noticed that there are things that they can use and share the same way. Actually, if you sing capitalism and cottagecore, this might sound like it makes more sense, because in cottagecore and witchcore in general, we try to go back to the roots. We like the idea of having this cottage being the witch at the edge of town that concocts potions and lives of that. And there is an emphasis put on culture, tradition, heritage, what came before. But guess what? It's something that the new right can very easily co-opt and going, yes, tradition is very important. Tradition is so important that maybe immigration ruins it. Maybe we should be segregated racially because if you come to my land, you bring your traditions. And if we mix tradition, I lose my identity. How many times have you heard the insane reverse racism concept of the Great Replacement?
The Great Replacement, also known as replacement theory or Great Replacement theory, is a white nationalist, far-right conspiracy theory which has since been advanced in other national contexts, notably in the United States. The particular term was popularised by Renaud Camus in his 2011 book Le Grand Remplacement. The book associates the presence of Muslims in France with danger and destruction of French culture and civilization. Camus and other conspiracy theorists attribute recent demographic changes in Europe to intentional policies advanced by global and liberal elites, the replacists, from within the government of France, the European Union, or the United Nations. They describe it as a genocide by substitution. Mainstream scholars have dismissed these claims of a conspiracy of replacist elites as rooted in a misunderstanding of demographic statistics and premised upon an unscientific, racist worldview, and have argued that calls to violence are implicit in his depiction of non-white migrants as an existential threat to white populations.
Where basically white people fear that non-white people will do to them what they have done to all the other populations and countries around the world through colonialism, which then makes you wonder, like one of the main things that I see On the reviews of books like these, books like Why I No Longer Talk About Race to White People, it's always the white person saying, they just want to do to us what we did to them. Which A, it's not the case, but B, so you know what you've done. Also, you know how many traditions in witchcraft have to do with being passed through generations, through families, which, yeah, I can kind of get it. You get connected to your ancestors, but how easy is it for the new right to co-opt it and make it bioessentialist? So the power is in the blood. And how easy is it to ruin the blood? The one-drop rule, stuff like that. There's also the point of the care for nature, for the environment. The new right very easily co-opted that as well, with, again, the idea that there's too many people, really. The new right has been marketed specifically by and for pagans in a religious context under the phrase radical traditionalism, primarily to heathens, pagans with a specific interest in Germanic and Scandinavian traditions, but also to the Reconstructionists and pagans with a strong generalized interest in folk tradition, radical environmentalism, and anti-modernism. Strategists within the New Right and other fascisms refer to the promotion of the New Right amongst pagans as metapolitics. They argue that they are engaged in apolitical cultural activity, which is working to change perceptions in order to shift the nature of society. Pagans do not want to be seen as stealing traditions that do not belong to them. As a result, pagans feel as though they need to be able to legitimately claim ownership to the traditions they practice, which has led to an increase in ethnic reconstructionist paganism within the United States, as people try to become involved with traditions they feel they can legitimately claim as their own. The models for this type of practice tend to be heavily culturally bounded, using a genetic model of cultural transmission, one anthropologists recognize to be greatly flawed and incorrect, but which is a defining feature of the new right ethnopolitics. What tends to be missing in these, however, is the explicit discussion of power dynamics and commercialization that underpins the discourses of cultural theft. The new right generally embraces and promotes a form of radical environmentalism and environmental preservation that is consistent with their views of anti-modernity, anti-capitalism, and anti-industrialism. They believe that the current condition of the environment is going to lead to an apocalyptic state which requires drastic measures to reverse, such as total dictatorship, eugenics, and genocide. People will only be allowed to travel short distances, and immigration will not be allowed under any circumstances. And the new right is very aware of this, and things like new folk, like the music, parts of new metal, and there are indeed publishing houses that are literally set up just to casually republish the work of, I don't know, father of fascism Julius Evola.
Giulio Cesare Andrea Julius Evola was an Italian far-right philosopher. Evola has been called the chief ideologue of Italy's radical right after World War II, and his philosophy has been characterised as one of the most consistently anti-egalitarian, anti-liberal, anti-democratic and anti-popular systems in the 20th century. Writings by Evola contain misogyny, racism, anti-Semitism and attacks on Christianity and the Catholic Church. He continues to influence contemporary traditionalist and neo-fascist movements. In the 1920s, he delved into the occult. He wrote on Western esotericism and Eastern mysticism, developing his doctrine of magical idealism. His writings blend various ideas of German idealism, Eastern doctrines, traditionalism, and the interwar conservative revolution.
I mean, yes, he has done work on esoteric stuff, but he is also indeed the father of fascism, along with Mussolini and along with D'Annunzio. They count a lot on promoting themselves, the right, through cultural activities that can raise enough reasonable doubt. So, no, New Folk is absolutely not racist, not white supremacist. It's just steeped in Celtic culture, and that used to be white. Cheddar Man was brown. They try to be metapolitical, which basically means let's publish the esoteric work of Julius Evola, and then, eventually, when you have started to get interested in his esoteric work, we'll let you know that also his ideas about fascism were, again, eugenicist and about genocide and all that kind of stuff. You already appreciate part of his work. That could have been a Trojan horse. There are publishing houses set up specifically for that. Some examples are Runa Raven Press, Inner Traditions, Dominion Press, Arctos, and very clearly Scarlet Imprint. I mean, radical traditionalists, if you hear that and you think the traditional part is interesting to witchcraft, it's not. They are fascists. And if we are talking about tradition, it's worth mentioning that Imane Khelif is from Algeria. Algeria is a colonized country. France owns it. Owned it. We're still a bit in the middle of things. And there's a thing about colonialism that I tend to explain when I do intersectionality workshops in regard of why is so unique the state of queer people when they are people of color. And the thing is, before white colonial conquest from England, from the Netherlands, from France, most countries that were not from the West and that the white colonialists went to didn't used to see gender as a binary. Gender was a spectrum, and when you didn't fit on the extremes of the spectrum, you were touched by the gods usually. It was a good thing before the colonialists arrived and decided that no, you are a degenerate if you're anything but a man or a woman.
Algeria criminalizes same-sex sexual activity between men and between women. Sentences include a maximum penalty of 3 years imprisonment and a fine. There is some evidence of the law being enforced in recent years, and LGBT people are vulnerable to discrimination and violence. Algerian law has its origins in French law, having been French colony until independence in 1962.
And when the colonial people arrive and establish these new laws, you have two choices. You rebel and get killed, or you go along with the new rule. So much so that there is a term to define why people that weren't always born into something, into a kind of rule, they actually go harder than people that were born in it. It's called new convert syndrome.
The term seal of the convert is commonly used in popular culture as it is believed that converts to new beliefs are likely to show more devotion than those born in the beliefs.
In terms of religion, but that's also the reason why you will find that within communities of color, sometimes you find harsher homophobia and transphobia. Why is that? Because they already come from one marginalization, so they fear anything else that could be used against them. And if they are still alive, they tend to be the ones that come from a family that had to survive the colonial imperialist conquest. And to do that, they had to adapt to the new rule and go 110 against everything that their tradition knew up until that point. And so if all of a sudden the gender was binary, yeah, let's go hard on this. Not only it needs to be binary, it needs to be expressed in a certain way. Recent convert syndrome is one of the ways that you can see how survival has to kick in, and you can become an oppressor then to your own people because you go along with what the oppressor says, hoping that you'll be one of the good ones that they leave alone. Your silence will not protect you. So at this point you would be justified in thinking, well, Isha, aren't you happy that so many people stood up and called out against this insane mistreatment of Imane Khelif? Because it's true, transphobia hurts cis women too. And again, when I shared my experience, when at the time I thought I was cis, I was supposed to be a cis girl, 11, what are you at 11? A cis child. But I shared that experience to reinforce the fact that misogynoir and transphobia have a lot of overlaps. And because Alexis shared her experience as the Black Forger as well, that seemed solidarity with Imane. And within a week or 10 days, it has been taken to a point where cis is the defense for Imane. How dare you call her trans? She's cis. And when you say something like that, well, it's not even that much of an implication, is it? You need to defend her calling her cis because then trans is an insult. And this is one of the pitfalls that even within progressive circles we fall into. We focus so much on individuals that we forget that the entire issue is intersectionality. Intersectionality is about systems of powers. And so as much as the issue was highlighted by this individual and this situation, the solution has to do with the system, not with not calling Imane trans because that's a bad thing and she's not. When I heard her story, my first thought was, girl, I feel you, not, see, if those transes didn't exist, they wouldn't have accused you, they wouldn't have accused me of being trans, they wouldn't have used it as an insult at all. And my bottom line in this, it's incredible to me, it always goes back to this, and I've mentioned it in other videos before. In the world, there are two kinds of people. Either something bad happens to you, and you want everybody to suffer the way that you did, or something bad happens to you, and you don't want that to happen to anyone else. I think then the bottom line is empathy, compassion. When I was accused of being trans because of how I looked, never for one moment that felt like an insult because it came and was defined by people that were trans at the time. I didn't have any resentment towards the people that they were grouping me with. I had a resentment towards the girls that were using that as a way to other me. And in fact, as a non-binary person now, as an Arab person, as a queer person, as a neurodivergent person, I know for a fact that I share much more experience in life with my trans siblings than I could ever with JK Rowling, despite the fact that she claims to stand up for people who accidentally were born with a uterus like me. I think that the first reaction of sympathy and support of Imane was great from the cis and the trans community. But where most people then have pushed to is again on this holding up her cisness like the shield. And again, the implication of that is then how low and how right would it be to take it against her if she was trans. And again, are you forgetting that there are trans people, trans siblings, trans athletes, that by you holding up the cisness of Imane is the only thing to defend herself with, you're basically saying, yeah, maybe trans people shouldn't be here. You know, in the witchcraft community, we talk a lot about following your instinct, your intuition, the first thing, the gut feeling that comes to you. But what we need to do in situations like this, the opportunity that situations like these present, is to unpack, is it intuition or is it an unconscious bias because we have been raised in a context, a culture, a place by people that put their own unconscious biases on you. On that regard, I will give you a very personal example. I was born and raised in Italy, despite the fact that I am half Egyptian, and I was raised by the white side of my family. That means that for a very long time, I deluded myself into thinking that I was white, and every racial attack that I received, I readdressed and tried to redefine as an attack on other parts of my identity, because I was fat, because I was autistic, because of all these reasons, but nothing that could be said about my race, because in my perception, I was white. The fact that my name and my surname were Arab were mistakes that I resented my mother for, but that was it. And the culture in Italy is insanely racist, pervasively racist, because we never had to deal with our colonialism. We lost World War II, so there was never the immigration from the colonies to the motherland until the 80s when, especially from North Africa, there started to be immigration. My father was one of those people. Even being the daughter of an Egyptian man, the culture and the media in Italy genuinely are so pervasive to make you understand and believe that a person of color will always come after the last white person. And that occurred to me when in 1996, Italy had Miss Italy, so the highest beauty pageant that we have. There was one by an Italian woman. She was naturalized Italian, but she was born in Santo Domingo. She was a person of color. Can you imagine how insanely beautiful she is, Dani Mendez, to win Miss Italia? But that created a scandal that reinforced even more the racism of Italy. And I remember myself as a child of color that would deny their own origin, thinking, well, she doesn't pass enough, and so it's fair that no matter how pretty she is, she should be considered at the end of the list, after the last white person has come. Because that's what the entire culture of Italy had always told me. From media, entertainment, every single thing was so pervasive that that thought came to me as a child of mixed race, thinking that, and then thinking, I have to do better to pass for white myself, because I know otherwise what the rule is. I consider it that way at this point, I apply it to someone else. So there is a lot to unpack internally with ourselves to understand. If you think that the best defense Imane Khelif has to all these accusations is that she is cis, she can prove it, she has female reproductive organs, there are pictures of her as a child being a girl, is that the only valid thing? If that wasn't the case, would you think differently? Wouldn't you be here to defend her? And if that is the case, maybe we should ask ourselves why. And until the next video, I really do hope that we can hex the cis, white, het patriarchy together, because there is need for it. Say bye.
Bye.